Hello there, it is me, Nadia Ramoutar, and it's a delight to be with you and do this little presentation with you. I was very kindly invited by your principal before to come and speak to the students earlier in the year and to come and speak to the parenting group earlier in the year. And none of us had any idea how this was going to be months later. So it's an incredible moment for all of us. And so I have been asked to talk about positive parenting during a pandemic, and is it possible? So I'm very, very glad to be here with you, because one of the things it did asking me to do this was make me think about this myself and to think about what I was going through. So one of the things for sure, since I met some of your children and some of you, things have really changed recently for teenagers. Of course, we could say they've changed for all of us. But one thing is for certain, it is certainly not business as usual. Obviously, schools have closed everywhere around the country and really in most parts of the world. Those students who are waiting to look at big exams this year, major exams, a lot of their life choices have been put on hold, a lot of unknowns, still the expectation of the pressure, just regular exams, just even seeing friends, going to sporting events, having music lessons, pretty much everything on hold. And obviously creating a tremendous confusion is probably the best word for it for many of us. So your teen's world has radically been altered, and it happened quite abruptly, as we all know. So there wasn't a huge amount of time to prepare. There wasn't a huge amount of time to even grab books or assignments or all kinds of things that could have happened. But as we are seeing now, there was a huge reason why it had to happen the way it did. But as it was happening, that certainly wasn't a pleasant experience for any of us with children in the school system, and certainly not for the kids themselves. So how do we help our children in a pandemic when, truthfully, a lot of us are not really sure how to help ourselves? Some of us are very fortunate, and we have great networks and we have great connections, and with people who've been helping us through this. But this is, the word keeps being used, unprecedented, and as such, it's very difficult for us to know what we can and what we can't do. So I've done some research for you, and I've pulled some things together. As some of you know, my PhD is in communications, which is quite broad, but it does span different aspects of science, neuroscience, technology, and things like that, and of course media as well. So one of the things I feel like at the moment that I've had to do is to really start taking life in a different way. And I'm taking that big breath, and I feel very grateful to be able to take a breath. I think if nothing else, this pandemic has made us all very grateful for the ability to breathe. And I know some of us are dealing with sick family members. Some of us have been sick ourselves. Some of my close friends have been really impacted by this. And it's quite a scary time. And if you have family in different parts of the world, even more scary. Like myself, I know a lot of you may have seen your mother for Mother's Day through a window. Very, very weird and strange and a bit scary for many of us. So times like this really require us to perhaps change styles, to change patterns. And one of the things is it may be best for us to think about things in terms of a day at a time, and sometimes an hour at a time. So we know from psychology and a lot of years of study that people are motivated by different things, and different things impact people in different ways. But a fairly agreed upon order of things was proposed by psychologist Maslow. So what Maslow suggested to us is that people have levels of needs, and it's kind of like a pyramid. And the reason I wanted to throw this in here for you is to just be reminded that when things get a little different, crazy, a bit traumatic, complicated, confusing, that one of the things that happens is that our needs get adjusted. And I think one of the things we're in the position of looking at now is that our needs and our wants are not the same thing. So one of the things we're up against now is to really look at how and in what way we are impacting and being impacted. And one of the big things, of course, that's been changed is our physiological needs, our ability to be near other people, to have safety needs met, to make sure that we're not doing things that in some way, shape or form are violating that. And then of course our social needs, which are different now. So we have this online. I'm obviously not in the school, I'm not with you. I'm obviously at home, in my home, and you are most likely in your home, or if you're like me, you're in your car, which is the other place where you have to retreat to when you're trying to do something quietly or importantly away from the noise of your house. And at this point, I'd like to give a disclaimer. I have a 12-week-old puppy who could just start crying at any moment when she realizes she can't find me. And I also have 2 children of my own who also cry when they can't find me. So, you know, there's a lot going on here. And even for me to get the makeup, to find my lipstick and my hairbrush and actually get out of my pajamas was a major undertaking after weeks of being here in the house. So without a doubt, things have changed, but expectations are the same. Many of us are working, many of us are trying to help children who are high achieving. Some of us are trying to help children with learning disabilities. And there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot going on at one time. So just taking a look at this, I just want us to realize that the order of things that were important have very much been changed. One of the things that I was doing recently in my work was doing some research on pandemics and how pandemics impact us. And one of the things that I know from the work that I've been doing in campaigns is that pandemics have existed since we can remember. In other words, going back to early history of 1430 BC in Athens, we know that 2/3 of the population at that time across Africa and Asia and the Middle East and here in Europe were impacted, and an estimated 2/3 of the population wiped out by pandemics in the past. The Black Death killed 1/3 of the population of the time in 1350. And as recently as 101 years ago, the Spanish flu also killed millions of people. So we know that pandemics are something that happen. They have happened predominantly in very poor areas of the world and spread to other areas of the world quite rapidly. We know that they're transferred. We know that it's transferable. The term quarantine comes from an Italian term, which means 40 days, because in the 14th century, they required the boats in Venice to sit in the dock for at least 40 days before they would let them come off the boat. And now we can see the wisdom of that. We can see why, that by the 14th century, there had been enough pandemics in the world to understand the importance of isolation. So I had no idea probably before now how much pandemics have impacted the world's history. It certainly influenced the Vikings and their plans. It influenced the French-English wars. It's influenced all kinds of things throughout time, and it has changed us in ways for thousands and thousands of years. So I just wanted to share that with you. But one of the things that we do know from the Spanish flu, which ironically should not be called the Spanish flu because we know it did not originate in Spain, but it is called the Spanish flu of 1918. And one of the things that we know is that social distancing has absolutely been critical in all of these things. And we do know that things that we are doing before we have a cure and before we have a vaccine are the only things that we can really do at the moment. So we're doing all that we can. And I think having that big perspective that this is something that has burdened cultures through time and society through time, since we've all come and lived together and stopped being nomads wandering about, this is something that we have had to deal with to the best of our ability. And there also is no doubt that now in 2020, we have things like Zoom, which is amazing. I'm able to record this for you and then share that link. We have all these different ways. And one of the things I want you to think about is that this is part of humanity. This is part of human suffering. This is part of what our ancestors had to deal with as well. And until we can get to a point as cultures and societies and countries where we address the needs of the poorest and the poorest communities of the world, pandemic diseases are things that will continue. So this is something we're going to get through. It's something that people have gotten through time, and it's not new, though it is, of course, new to us. I love this picture of these parents because many of us are at a point historically in our own families where we've probably spent more time exclusively together than even on a holiday. Because, you know, we at some point had interaction with other human beings, or we at some point had other locations or other things. But we are at a moment in time where we are in this tight space. And the space, you may have a beautiful, fabulous, wonderful home, it feels like it's getting smaller. It's like that scene in Star Wars where the walls start to come in. And one of the things is that we are trying to balance so many things. Many of us, like myself, are working from home. Many of us are trying to homeschool children. Some of us are trying to help kids with subjects that are really hard for us. Some of us are dealing with financial issues. There are people who've lost work. My own sister had to close her business. We're all dealing with so much, and we're coping with so much going on, as well as what's outside of the house, and as well as the bad news and the difficult news and the sad news we're seeing from around the world. So there are, of course, people who are doctors and nurses, and people who are health administrators, and people who are constantly on the front line, who also have additional fears and all kinds of things. And then we have our children and their life as being a child, and what that means, and what their goals and aspirations are. And it's not their fault really, but a lot of times children really genuinely think about themselves. So we have to embrace this new normal, and that is this formula, right? Which is force over area equals pressure. And I love this because I think it helps us understand that we are under pressure, and we are in a force, we are in a situation where all of these dynamics physically are really challenging for us, but we really have no choice. This is really all we can do. And I think a lot of us are doing our very best, and some of us are doing very well. And then some of us are doing really well with days where we're not doing really well. Like, I'll be honest, yesterday for me, it was a very hard day. For some reason, I hit some kind of a wall, and so did my children at the same time. And even it was a very challenging day, and I felt like a total imposter, because here I was putting this together for you and thinking I'm possibly unraveling myself, but of course I was able to pull it back together. So in doing this for you all, I am just trying to share some things that may be helpful to you, but I am by no means espousing my own expertise at this, other than these are some things that may be helpful to you. So the trouble with teenagers and pandemics. At first, this was presented to us as something that could only impact really elderly people and people who had underlying issues. But sadly, we're seeing some stories from England, from America, from different parts of the world, where people of all ages, as early as 13, have been impacted by this. And there are children and young people in critical care around the world. And unfortunately, there have been some young people who have even died. And so there's a lot of things that were really important that are now gone sideways. There are things that they were focused on. A lot of us had our children on schedules. A lot of us thought things would be a certain way, and we felt that it would be that way. And now all of those things are up in the air. And we are kind of being asked to trust in the system that everything will come right. We don't know when it will come right. We don't know how it will come right, but we're being asked to just stay where we are and know that all these things will be handled in due time. Things that seemed very rigid have now become fluid, which isn't always helpful, especially to young people who had things planned, who are now being told otherwise. Another part of this I think we have to look at is that isolation in culture has always been used as a form of punishment. Solitary confinement is used in prisons to punish people. And go to your room, or being grounded, or being isolated, it has been used as punishments throughout time. And so for us to voluntarily do this of our own free will and to enjoy it is almost counterculture to our brains. And some of us, I mean, I think one of my children loves it and would be perfectly happy if he never went back to school. And I do think there are people who are fine with this. But there are also people who are really struggling with this. So one of the things that seems to be happening is whatever the communication flaw was between you and someone else in the home, it's probably been exaggerated. So for example, if you have somebody in the family, maybe it's you or someone else with anxiety, these anxiety attacks are flaring up, they're happening. If you have somebody who tends to get a little bit blue, a little depressed, that's happening. If you've got someone with a lot of pent-up energy, who's high energy, that's happening. So all of these things are somehow being exaggerated and magnified because we're with each other so much and it's around us so much. And so if you had a kid who didn't study, who didn't do any work, that's magnified because it's right in front of you now, right? So all of the things that were issues before haven't magically gone away. A lot of times, some of them have been less obvious, but now we're in a situation where it feels like some things are just overwhelming. So how can we help ourselves and our teenagers? So this is uncharted territory for many of us. Unless you happen to have been a parent in 1918, which is some miracle in itself, you probably haven't had this experience before. So this is unique to us. And so 4 steps that I have for us that I'd like to discuss are reassurance, routines, regulation, and renewal. I love alliteration, so there we go. So reassurance, number 1. I think it's very important for us to realize that the human brain is not fully formed until about 28 years of age. So we want to think of the human brain, the teenage brain, as wet cement. And that is not meant by any form to be disrespectful, but it's not fully formed, it's not fully imprinted. And it's very important that well-being be maintained mentally as much as physically during this time. So when the frontal lobe is not fully developed yet, one of the things that can happen is major emotional or physical behavioral issues can emerge. So what we have to realize is that teenagers, even if they're very confident and very mature, will still need some level of reassurance from us at this stage. Some younger children or some children who really may not be doing well, you may see it in terms of acting out, fighting with one another, fighting with you, going very quiet, being unwilling to be social. So there will be children who will suffer silently, as maybe some of you are or your partner is, and there will be some who try to mask behaviors, either by being silly or being ridiculous or being needy or whatever that is. So one of the things we need to do is find ways to really have meaningful discussions without forcing ourselves upon our teenagers. In other words, we need to provide an opening, and we need to listen, and we need to be very careful about not forcing ourselves on them, and not making this idea of being locked in with your family and away from all your friends, not minimizing how important that is to many of them. And I think back on myself, and if at 16 I had been locked in somewhere with my parents, away from my friends, I in many ways would have been one grieving child. Of course, then we wouldn't have had Skyping and Zooming and Snapchat and 50 million ways. So right now, your child might be acting like their computer or their phone or their device is their lifeline, because to them, in many ways, it may feel like it is. Another thing to keep in mind is that pleasure and novelty are very important to young brains. They seek it, they want it, they expect it. It's more of a drive, it's more of a motivator than it may be for a lot of us by now at this stage as parents. And that can be annoying, or it can be confusing for us as to the severity of the situation and why they're still looking for novelty or looking to enjoy themselves or looking for pleasure. So just be patient as best you can and understand that some of the things that are going on are not really your child's personality so much as the situation you're all in. So right now, one of your superpowers is your ability to listen. Your ability to listen to what's going on in the world outside, your ability to listen to your children, and to try and give everybody in the house, in the space, a voice, including yourself. So finding a way to hear and be heard without domination is what everybody's trying to do. So to try and find a way to speak to your children and to look at what's happening in the world, but to also listen and to make sure that you are asking questions is one of the best ways to do that. I saw this somewhere that perfection is the enemy in a pandemic, and I love that because pushing for perfection at the moment is going to cause unhelpful stress, and it will also put demands on people that will be counterproductive. I love this Kit Kat people that they made here, but we're not robots. And we have to figure out how to give ourselves a break. We need to figure out how to give one another a break, and to realize that if we push and if we're unreasonable, it's going to backfire on us. And I loved this 1950s image of this housewife, good morning, let the stress begin. Because as soon as some of us wake up, from the moment we wake up, there is this sense of, wow, it's still here, it's still happening. And it doesn't look like it's going to go away immediately at all. So this is a longer run, longer haul than maybe we expected. So we need to just really understand that we ourselves have a stress type. We're human, we have a stress type. Our stress type is something we need to look at. The way we're acting, the way we're behaving is setting a tone for the rest of the family, and we need to be very aware of our own stress. I, for one, have had to take, you know, my 2 kilometers one way, my 2 kilometers another way. I've had to take those full amounts of kilometers I'm allowed to get out and to be walking, and thankfully I have this puppy that I use it as an excuse, but I need the headspace. I need to get out, I need to be away. I started drinking my tea in the morning in the garden, sitting on a swing, just to be out in nature, just to kind of change up the view a little bit. And I've also done some things, like I signed up for an online course in art that I've wanted to take for a long time. It wasn't very expensive, and just try and find ways for you to have outlets so that your stress level can become manageable and it's not so stressful for you. Pandemics bring a different kind of grief, and with grief, there's a huge amount of emotion that comes up. And just like a loss, it brings up emotion in different ways at different times for different people. And sometimes what it can do is bring a flood of emotion at one time. So all of us are a little bit different. And the US Center for Disease Control has said that children and teenagers are much more vulnerable to the emotional impact of trauma at times like this than adults. We may not see it, or we might not realize it. So it's very important for us to find ways to allow all feelings to come up. Some of us are overeating, some of us are undereating, some of us are very sad, some of us are thrilled, some of us are excited, some of us are confused, some of us are just in different ways. Some families are really not going to be impacted by this at all. There are families who will benefit from this financially, and there are families who will be devastated by this. As best we can, not sharing financial concerns or adult issues with children is probably the smartest thing to do, because they're already worried enough. Be careful about your comments. If you feel like your kid is baking too much in there by eating far too much sugar, and they're going to be dealing with, you know, COVID-19 stone here, whatever your concerns are, worries are, be very careful, because communication is permanent. And if you say things or bring things up, you're going to have to live with them. So as much as you can, be very cautious about what you say, because it will spread. It spreads through the family, it spreads through everybody. There's this old Polish proverb, the fish stinks from the head. And you are the head of the family here, and you are the parents, and you have to work together, and you have to find ways to set a tone with your teens. For one, practicing gratitude. It's impossible to be anxious and grateful at the same time. So expressing gratitude, how fortunate we are that social distancing is a privilege. We're very lucky. There's going to be millions of people in slums around the world who will not make this. And there are people who in our own country who won't make this. So we need to be very grateful for all we do have. Maybe we don't have all the food choices we normally have, but how lucky are we that we have what we have? Now, we don't want to do this in a guilt-shaming way, like, you know, we used to hear these stories of, oh, you're not going to eat that, and children in Africa are starving. That we know did not work. So we're not looking to shame one another, but we are looking for ways to have positive expressions, to have positive language. And in moments where things are negative, or in moments where things are difficult, or where you're struggling because maybe you've said something a few times and it's not being heard, then I want you to think about how you're doing and manage yourself so that you don't make a situation worse. Because one of the ways that a lot of times people do blow off steam or do get space is through fighting. And that's really not something we can afford to do. But telling someone how to feel in a pandemic is not helpful either. So that is something else that we want to do, is to allow all feelings to be present. So the next R that we're looking at is routines, and creating new routines as best we can. So starting the day as positively as possible. I have started doing a meditation in the mornings, and it helps me. I listen to it on my phone, and I go wherever I can find space to be by myself. A lot of times I'm just either in the garden, or I'm sitting on the couch, or lying on the couch sometimes even. But starting the day as positively as you can, whether that's writing in a journal or talking to someone who you do love, who you're positive about, whatever you could do, finding a way to have your favorite cup of tea, your favorite mug, but starting your day as positively as possible. One of the joys of this is that a lot of us are getting to have meal times together, which isn't always true. So making something special together, giving older teens and people the responsibility of what the meal is, what the choices are, how that can be done, trying new recipes we don't normally have time to do, doing some kind of movement. I don't always like to refer to it as exercise, but doing some kind of movement is really important. It's known for a fact that movement and exercise increases our lowers our cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and increases our endorphins, which is a positive hormone. So we want that. And do what you like. I mean, you can do yoga videos, you can do boxing, air boxing, you can do dancing, you can do push-ups. There's all kinds of things you can do. You can still walk, you can still run. We're fortunate that we can still go out at all. So find a way to have movement and to do something that you like. And as best you can, encourage people in the family to do something. We have a rule that you have to do something 20 minutes a day, but it can be whatever you want it to be. I almost injured myself doing Just Dance on Nintendo because I got so into it. And then the next day I was really feeling it after an hour of dancing along with an online video game. So, you know, do what's fun for you, because this should be something that's helpful. Having a structured school work time is obviously good, and a designated space in which it's getting done, getting into some kind of routine with that. And another thing about that, I would say, if you're normally doing a certain amount of time and somebody's having a very difficult day for whatever reason, try to be flexible as much as you can. I think that is something that's very, very important. I know from talking to a lot of teachers and a lot of principals that they're more concerned about your child's well-being than your child being top of the class at the moment. And I know adults who have told me they've had a very hard time focusing on work and getting things done, and they're very distracted. So let's be as flexible as we can. And on days when things are good, try to get more done. So keep your eye on that, because your goal is not to give anybody a nervous breakdown. And for the most part, we're all going to get through this, and we're all in the same situation here. So it's not like somebody else's kid is pulling ahead while your kid isn't. So as best you can, really try to look at that on a day-by-day basis. Family fun time. You know, watching something together. I don't want to promote certain networks over others, but agreeing on something that everybody would like to see on Netflix. Disney Plus has just come out with 500 movies, vintage movies, classic movies, and also new National Geographic documentaries are on there. Maybe old favorites that you have had as a family. But doing things, if you've got music in the family, people can play music together. We've got a 1,000-piece Harry Potter puzzle we're doing. And honestly, I thought, oh, this is so fun. This is going to be so great. But then sometimes when you have 4 people working on a puzzle at the same time, it ended up being a bit stressful, actually. So, you know, see what works, see what doesn't work, see what you can do, see how it goes. And if something works and it's positive, then do more of that. But this is a time to connect, and it is also a time to use technology, Skype, Zoom, FaceTime, WhatsApp, whatever. Call grannies, call family members, call relatives, call people who you love in different parts of the world. You can also ask for people to be mentoring your kids and to help your kids and to reach out to your kids on your behalf. As a godmother, I make sure that I'm checking in and making sure things are okay. I ordered a book for my godson to be sent to him because I knew he's a great reader and I knew he would probably really enjoy it. And he was so thrilled to get that from just ordering online and having it shipped to him. So just see what you can do to make it a little easier on one another. And the other thing is sleep. Some of us have had trouble sleeping and some of us have had trouble waking up. Some people are sleeping too much, some people are not sleeping enough. I think that this impacts us in different ways. I think some of us are dealing with insomnia because we've got so much on our mind, and it's hard to shut that off. So if you are someone who's having trouble sleeping, consider a nap. If you do feel like somebody's oversleeping and sleeping too long, what you can do is regulate it by obviously waking up at a certain time, and then the body will reset itself. The other thing I want to say on routines here is that a lot of us came into this exhausted. So do keep that in mind. So we're talking about the next R here, which is regulation. And I was being a bit cheeky here perhaps, and I said, you are the ringleader in charge of this circus. So there's a lot of different moving parts, but you are the one bringing it together. And the one thing I would insist on is things that are in people's own best interest. And you have to be a role model for this. So making sure that choices are kept that are positive. We've talked about a few of them already. Regulating news. I don't think having any news cycle on 24/7 at the moment is a smart thing to do. It's exhausting, it's tiring. It's going to make people feel more anxious. So if you personally have to check into it every hour, that's your choice. I'm doing twice a day. But make sure, we're all getting alerts on our phone and our media, and we will hear if something major happens or changes. So just be careful about oversaturation. And then the other thing, of course, is where we're getting our news from. So it's very important to make sure the quality of the media is there, and that we're making sure we're not depending on rumors or gossip or anything like that, but to make sure that we're getting quality information. Another thing that I think can be quite good is to encourage your children to make contributions in some way, whether that's writing a card to granny or their doctor or somebody that we know, our GPs, if it's about contributing in some way, something that they're good at, they have a talent for that they can do, perhaps sing a song that they can send to people, but find ways as best you can to help your child see themselves as a contributor, because that will really help them and will increase their self-esteem. Definitely around the house, find things that people can do, designate certain tasks. Everybody can do something, but make sure that everybody is really contributing in some way. So one of the other issues here is self-efficacy. So making sure that to the degree that you can, you allow your teenager to have some self-control and that they have a sense of agency over their own life. So it's not the military. You want to make sure that everybody feels that they have a say, but don't hesitate to be the last word on something if it's related to well-being or safety. I remember when all this started, and a friend of mine who has a teenage girl who's extremely social had mentioned to me that her daughter was having a little bit of a hard time with this new situation, because in the beginning it wasn't really clear how serious this was. And I remember saying to her, well, that's just too bad. She has to stay in. She's not going anywhere. That's it. And some people did have to say to their children, you are not going. That is how it is. And it was hard initially. So some of us have been through some stuff in the past few weeks, and we need to be very mindful that disrespect, being unkind to your siblings, being unkind to one another, drama, all of that isn't going to help. And you just have to really not tolerate it. Whatever way you can, you have to find a way that there is harmony and courtesy and kindness and generosity and contributing going on, that we're all working together. We're all helping one another. And then the other thing is, you don't want to constantly be on everybody. You can't constantly be, the tiger who's on the attack, who's like, you didn't do your work and I've got to, da, 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 da. You don't want to be a doormat. So get up off the ground and have rules and have guidelines and have regulations in place. Pandemic measures, you can. And then the other part of that is find that middle way so that you are not wrecking yourself as well and everybody's, miserable. So try to find that balance with you and your partner. The next one is renewal, which to me is very important. You cannot pour from an empty cup. I say this all the time. So if you're like me, I find myself pouring empty half-drank cups of tea out all the time, or shoving it in the microwave and forgetting I put it there. But you cannot pour from an empty cup. This is not forever. This isn't going to be forever. you know? So let's have a vision for the future of things we do want to do in the future, places we may want to go, things we do want to do. Let's get that going. Acknowledge your own stress type, and then acknowledge what you need to renew. Like sometimes maybe you need to go to bed and read a book, or you need to, you know, whatever it is, like you just need to figure out what your renewal way is. Be careful of escapism. I don't know what else to call it, but there's been a lot of jokes about drinking and a lot of jokes about eating junk food and stuff like that. And the truth of the matter is they're not entirely jokes, because some people are coping with stress. And there are things like sugar and alcohol that do give us a little bit of a feel good. But the truth of the matter is, in the long term, they're really not helpful and they're not good role modeling. So we need to work on that. I mentioned before, perfectionism is the enemy of coping in a pandemic. So lowering our standards on some things just may have to happen. And I know that's hard. Like when I walk past a piece of carpet that needs to be vacuumed and I've asked somebody to do it, I think my head's going to explode sometimes. So finding a way to cope and deal with things so that you're not constantly just monitoring everything is a good idea. Don't be afraid to have some fun. Cut yourself some slack. We are in a pandemic after all, and we don't know what that means exactly. So whatever way you can find that every day, do something nice for yourself. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like, but whatever it is for you, whether it's putting on a moisturizer or reading a favorite book or calling someone. One of my friends and I, we've gotten into a habit of calling when we're on a walk because we're away and you can talk and then you're a bit more free, you know? Cutting yourself some slack and giving yourself some time so that you can renew every single day is so important, because right now your immunity level needs to be high, your stress level needs to be as low as possible. And some of us are really going to suffer with anxiety to the point where we almost could make ourselves sick. And we don't want that. So we want the immunities to be high, laughter, fruits, vegetables, water. There's certain things that are going to help us keep that immunity level high. We want to do that. We need to do that. That's really, really, really important. We have some holidays coming up. And I want to remind you that those are holidays. Those were dates your child was not going to be in school. Maybe you weren't going to be working. Take those days to the fullest, to the degree that you can. Make it a celebration within your family, whether you're whatever religion you are, whatever you're celebrating at springtime. You want to really use that to the fullest. Use it as a way to rejuvenate. Use it as a way to have fun. Spring is such a lovely time, such a delightful time. There's so much beauty. Things are starting to bud. I know it's a bit late this year because it's been a little colder, but really take time to celebrate when that comes and step away from work. If you've got some kids who've been working for exams, let them take a break, encourage them to take a break, and find a way to rejuvenate. I've been saying this quite a bit, and I think it's a bit silly, but if isolation is overwhelming you, you are not alone. And it just kind of makes me laugh, but it is overwhelming, and you are not alone by any means. There are millions and millions and millions and millions of parents around the world who are struggling right now for many, many reasons. And none of us have been through this before. None of us know exactly what we're doing. And if you need help, or if your child is struggling beyond what you're able to cope with, don't hesitate to reach out and ask someone and tell someone. If you're having a hard day, if you're not coping, don't feel like you've got to, you know, be this Wonder Woman character or this Superman character and carry the world on your shoulders. You do not. So it's very, very important that you realize, we celebrate one another, we support one another, we're there for one another. You know, that you're not alone in this. Your family is not alone in this. And we are, as a community, coming together by being apart. And that's not to be cliche, but there will be help for you. There will be help for you with your child. There will be help for you through the school. Help is there. It will come. We will do this together. We're in this together. None of us are alone, and we're going to get out of this together. And we as a community will make that happen. So just keep that connection and that vision of connectivity in your mind, because it's really important. It's been my pleasure to do this with you. I'm so grateful I was asked to do it because it really did cause me to stop and reflect and think about what would help and how that would help. If this has been helpful to you, you are more than welcome to share the link. I've offered this PowerPoint to your principal at the school. She can share that with you. You can share this talk. My email is here. It's drnadram@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be more than happy to answer what I can or to help you find resources. So it's absolutely been a pleasure. I hope something I said was helpful to you, and I want to encourage you to keep going. And thank you again for joining me, and take care. Bye now.